Okay, today my guest is Dean Paul Almeida. I'll keep my introduction short to maximize our time with him. In the next 30 minutes or so, we'll talk about Paul as a person, Professor Almeida as a thought leader and an esteemed scholar, and finally as a mentor to many PhD students and junior faculty. For the sake of time, I'll skip many of his accomplishments and give you a very quick snapshot. Paul Almeida is Dean and William Berkley Chair at Georgetown University. Paul's research focuses on innovation, knowledge management, alliances, informal collaborations across organizations and countries. He has published in and served on the editorial boards of our top journals. He served as chair of TIM division of AOM. He also received Academy of Management's International Business Outstanding Educator Award. In addition to his academic accomplishments, as the dean in over 30 countries, he has built 6 executive education degree programs and 25 executive custom programs. The Financial Times ranks the executive programs among the best in the world. Thank you, Paul, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really glad to be here.
Paul, what did you want to become when you were a child?
Yeah, so that's a good question. But one thing I'm pretty sure I wasn't going to become as a professor. So I thought my father was a naval officer, so I thought I might join the military when I was very little. As I grew a little bigger, I thought maybe I want to do something different. And I was very interested in business. It's kind of interesting. I was interested in business. I was fairly creative and innovative. So I thought I'd be an entrepreneur, even though I had no idea what an entrepreneur was. I was just someone who'd do something new and different. And I trained as an engineer. So I thought I would be a good engineer. And then I kind of got bored of it. And I think I became a professor because, when you can't really do anything, you teach. So that's partly why I became a professor. But more honestly, I found I loved understanding things and learning about things. And that's why I actually decided to do my PhD, because I realized I wanted to discover more. And while doing my PhD, I learned that I actually like teaching. I didn't know I would like teaching. And after coming to Georgetown, when I was both a researcher and teacher, I was sure I would hate being an administrator. And a former dean many years ago pushed me into administration, and the rest is history. So I think my life has not been so much about what do I want to be, but discovering along the way what I like and what I can do and how I can contribute.
What's something not on your CV, but people might find interesting about you?
Definitely not on my CV. I'm a very family man. I come from a family of 7 kids. So my family always meant a lot to me. They always occupied my life. I have only 2 kids, myself and a dog and a wife, obviously. And I thoroughly enjoy my time with my family. I have lots of cousins and nieces and nephews and as well. It's definitely not, but that really takes a lot of my time. I've learned how to cook quite well because of my family. I, like to do my yard again because of my family. I spend a lot of time with my dog. She's nearly 14 years old and she's lying at my feet now, very attached to me. So it's definitely not on my CV, but that's very much part of who I am, a very important part of who I am.
If you had to do it all over again, or if you could do it all over again, what's the second best career path, alternative path for you?
I'm not sure if I'd been good at it, but I think I would have loved to have been an architect. I still like design and space and lights and structures. I love looking at, both old and modern buildings and how they use space and how space interacts with human beings. And even now, I often think, what if I could have been an architect? And the other thing I still want to be, but I don't know when, is I would love to be a a judge on one of these cooking shows. I love good food. I would love to be able to sit there, eat really cool food, and talk. So a little bit of the professor in that as well. We're always judging and evaluating. I like food, and I like different kinds of cuisine. And who knows? Maybe I'll get a chance one day.
Perfect. Regrets? Any regrets in life?
Not really. I think my focus has always been, and I learned this from my mother, making the most of life. It's never going to be perfect. It's not about what could have been, but it's what you can do to make the most of life for yourself and for people around you. And I really don't think I ever look back and say, I wish I had done this, or I wish that could have turned out differently, because that's in the past. It's about making the most of now and the future. And I know that sounds a bit like a Hallmark card, but it's not. But it's true. I really don't have many regrets in life at all.
Perfect. What are you most passionate about, other than family?
I'm grateful for this job, even though you probably know the job for dean in a business school in this world is not exactly smooth or easy. But just think about it. How many jobs can you feel that you can impact bright, young, eager people? And I don't want to call them kids because they're from 18 to someone like 40, to influence, to make a difference to themselves and make a difference to the world simultaneously. And I'm so grateful to have that opportunity, because I believe the world is a changing place, and I believe individuals can make a difference, and groups can make an even more powerful difference. And there are big questions that the world faces now, and to be at a place like my school, Georgetown, in this day and age, in the nation's capital, with so many influences throughout the world, and in a small way, be able to help people carve out a future and make a difference to the environment, or how technology is going to affect lives, or understand the complexity of business and global affairs, or business of health. I just think that's a privilege, that's an opportunity, and that's what gives me a lot of energy about this job, and gives me makes me feel happy about life.
You're one of the first scholars I met in AIB. I was a PhD student, maybe first year, second year PhD student. You've always had this extremely positive outlook. What's the secret? What's the secret of this positive outlook?
So I think some people find that irritating, right?
No, I find it admirable. It's just, I want to be like that. It's just, there's always something to worry about.
My family find it irritating anyway. But, my mother was, and still is, she's 89, a very positive person. And she could, go outside and just laugh. She'd look at the sun and smile. And I'm fortunate that I've inherited some of those genes and that genetics, or maybe it was more than the genes, it was her example. And, she had 7 kids and lots of challenges to face throughout her life. But to this day, she'll tell you things so positively about other people. She always sees the glass half full. And, and even, on the Sunday, she was worried about something. And then 2 days ago, she left me a message on WhatsApp. She records her stuff and said, "Don't worry, things are good. I just want you to be happy." And I was thinking, at the age of 89, more worried about me being happy than anything else. And I hope I've inherited a little bit of that positivity, that embrace of life. and embrace of the good we can create in life.
Perfect. Let's switch gears to talk about research. Paul, how do you explain your research to people who are not in the field, who don't read our journals regularly, and why your research is important? What's the main takeaway?
Yeah, I'm not sure if my research is important, but let me tell you what motivated me. When I started doing my PhD at Wharton, I was trying. I thought I'd got this great idea. You know how when we're doctoral students, you always think of some great idea, and then everyone tells you it's not such a good idea. I said, I'm going to discover how knowledge flows. And my advisor, Bruce Koger, told me thousands of people have looked after about it, at this question for hundreds of years. And, I pulled out some books because that was before the internet, in the library about, big tomes like this about knowledge and its development and its flows. And so I was forced to say, okay, this is an important topic because people have been trying to understand it for years, but I have to try to. So I try to say, really, how does knowledge flow and how does it build? And more important than that, what influences that? And therefore, what does it mean for firms or regions or countries? And then, Jaffe, Trachtenberg, and Henderson wrote their famous paper in QJE, sort of looking at patent data and saying knowledge is localized. And that influenced me a lot because then I said, but is it really localized? Because that was an aggregate level. And when is it localized and when is it not? And what are the influences to this localization of knowledge? And to tell you the truth, we're still answering those questions, right? Mm-hmm. And I looked mostly at geography and communities and technological closeness. So certain factors that created localness, but we're still trying to understand political factors, how people have very different beliefs nowadays about our elections or success, because we all live in small worlds and knowledge circulates and builds. So I think it's an eternal question, and it's an important question that I looked at from the point of view, obviously, of business and firms and technology and innovation. But we're still trying to understand, how does knowledge flow? How does it build across people and organizations? What are the influences? What is the impact? And all my papers were really driven by this, trying to understand better, whether it was on alliances or mobility, whether it was in a multinational context or what subsidiaries did in regions and the relative importance of headquarters, really understanding the sociology associated with the economics very often, and trying to say, how does it help us understand firms better? So, I'm still intrigued, and I still think we don't know many of these answers. But I'm glad now lots of people have done research on knowledge influences. When I hit the PhD market in 94, 95, many people said, is this really strategy? Is this really international business? Does it really matter? Yeah, no, and at all the top schools, people ask me that. At least one person in each school would ask me that question. I think I'm glad I helped, along with others, to open up a field within strategy and international business that may not have been prominent before.
Michael Lifeline would also add to the question, like, what's the strategy question here?
Yeah, and that's fair, right? That's fair. I think we have to embed our questions in narrower contexts, sure, and search for that.
So things that are omitted from research, things are neglected from our current studies that will be impacting the field in the next 5 to 10 years. And I'm not talking about only international business. It can be international management. It can be strategic management, international HR. Things that we have not developed fully because things are evolving still. Ideologies are shifting.
So I do think this. I do think our fields tend to follow trajectories which are defined very often by academia, because we're talking to each other a lot. And in terms of what is publishable, in terms of what, is manageable to reach a high degree of sophistication in our approach and methods. And because of that, and that's great, but because of that, sometimes we ignore the big questions that the world is asking, where we do have the insights and tools to address. So I feel, one, because interdisciplinary journals are really, fully respected in business schools. It's not that they're ignored, but they're harder to, say this is an unambiguous A journal, for instance. We often ignore the intersection of fields, international business with law, or international business with technology, or international business with medicine, perhaps, and health. And if you look at the real world, how exactly did we respond to COVID? Did the private sector firms play a big role? What was the interaction between the private sector firms and different governments? What, did multilateral institutions? And I don't think we understand really, from an international business point of view, the lessons of COVID, for instance. Not that COVID's in our rear view mirror, but so I think there's a huge opportunity to acknowledge that international business doesn't exist in ether, and embrace, and even more than this, further explore what it means in terms of its interaction with a whole host of fields, from medicine to law to technology to international relations to policy to politics. Is there some work being done? Yes. Is there an opportunity for us to understand that even more? The answer also is yes. So I'd say that's one area. Two, you'll have been doing much better job than we did in the past of recognizing that we have tended to look at international business largely from a Western and even US-centric perspective, in terms not just of data and the questions we ask, but also, the issues that are raised and important. And I think now, with more data becoming available, more scholars emerging from the rest of the world, I think this balance is changing. But even then, how much great research do we have, say, in Africa or really South America, top quality research? And it's very often US trained or sometimes European trained scholars who go back and do, some work in those regions. But I think there's an amazing opportunity actually to actually look at many of these same international business issues from perspectives of smaller countries or countries in the less developed world. And I think that will open up all sorts of avenues. And the third is, if you look at what our young people care about, right? They care about sustainability. They care about health. They care about the intersection of technology and politics and policy and firms, all of which are around the area of international business. I think we can start looking, saying, what is the most important things in the next 10 years? Because these are going to be a critical part. And how can we, even more than before? And I've seen a definite move towards understanding sustainability much more and different elements of sustainability. But do we really address the full ESG issues, including society and the government and governance, and what does that mean? I think there's an opportunity to take a cue from the next generation and say, what are the big IB issues that are going to be really important in 5 and 10 and 15 years? And what are the important questions we can both ask and help start answering? So there's great opportunity. I think it's even more exciting than 25 years ago because the boundaries of international business have been expanded.
This is interesting because you do talk about grand societal challenges and geopolitics. And I'm wondering if this is related to your unique location as in Georgetown. Is it because of political influences? Is it the same thing for uniformly distributed?
I think you're right. There's little doubt that being in Washington, D.C., right, you see the intersection of international business and policy and politics and even international relations, which is different, right? So it's really true. But the more, we take our students abroad, that's another influence of being at Georgetown. Nearly all our graduate students go out and do projects in different parts of the world. 70% of our undergraduates do it. I think it's given me a greater insight about what people really care about beyond just what's convenient or easy. And it often is at the intersection of international business and other fields. There's just so much need to understand a breadth of issues which we don't fully understand. And I think there's, it doesn't have to be policy. It doesn't have to be politics. It could be technology. It could be international relations. But, the acknowledgement. So if you've noticed over the last few years, people have started acknowledging that governments matter, not just in a negative way because they create regulation and we don't like regulation, but the intermingling of governmental and private sector influences, the role of nonprofits. I think we have to embrace this, complexity that actually influences international business and the effects, positive and negative effects we have. We know now that, we assumed globalization was just really a one-way street, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, sometimes there were pebbles on our path. But now we know it's not true. We know that there's not just severe pushbacks, in some cases there's reversals and re-questioning. And I think that's all good. And our students really, they ask me tough questions like, so when you're going to a new country, you're just looking at to see whether it's profitable or not. What does it mean for the local government? What does it mean for the local population? How uneven is it across different types of countries? Questions that we knew existed, but we didn't really spend that much time looking at. So I think there's this great opportunity out there.
Interesting.
And no doubt influenced by my location, but I think that's an advantage of my location.
I normally ask about the evolution of the field, and most of the people I interview, they talk about evolution of the research that is evolving into different aspects of MNCs, MNEs. Of course, yes. But what you're saying today is a bit different. That globalization, yes, but there's a huge deglobalization, and there's this new debate that people argue that deglobalization is a myth, which I quite disagree with. There is nationalism, there is populism, there are countries, we have discovered borders exist again. And how is this going to impact scholarship in not only IB, but related and even other disciplines?
I often felt this, but I didn't articulate the feelings into clear thoughts even in my own mind. That, fortunately or unfortunately, in the field of IB, we had become almost advocates for globalization. Most of the articles, anything which was, questioning the advantages of globalization, either to the firm or to the country or, host country, or to the home country or to the individual, was almost an exception. And sometimes, who are these crazy people doing it? Now, I think we have to embrace the complexity of globalization, which is a great boon to research. And say, I don't know if you remember years and years and years ago, long before either of us were in academia, Howard Perlmutter wrote that article on the tortuous evolution of the multinational corporation. And he came up with this idea of ethnocentric and regiocentric and polycentric and, I've forgotten, geocentric. I think we have to recognize that the world, not just multinationals, there are these powerful conflicting forces playing out through sometimes policy, sometimes through politics, sometimes in the economics. and they're competing with us, which makes an even more interesting world and even more interesting challenges to multinationals as as they go abroad. So as what does it mean for Tesla when Elon Musk takes over Twitter? And how open is he going to be in China versus here? I think there's these wonderfully interesting questions, and they are business questions because they're going to affect business and affect the way businesses impact the world. And I just think, the problem is it's hard. Some of these questions are messy. It's hard to get clean data to, do large scale empirical studies sometimes. So it might be more hard to publish. There's not always natural top tier outlets for some of this work. So it's going to be a journey. But I think if you look back 10 or 15 years from now, you will see the field of international business and international relations also moved more towards these intersections.
Perfect. About advice, you mentioned you worked with Bruce Kogat. Do you remember the best advice he gave you about research?
So I'll tell you one. Wharton was filled with many good scholars. I was lucky. Sid Winter was my chair. We had Dan Leventhal, we had Harpreet Singh. So many just very, very, very good people at the same time. And what I found special about Bruce was, he was bothered about, high quality quantitative research. He pushed us to do large scale empirical research. Of course, our methods then were not the methods now, obviously, which have advanced much more. But he also, just more than anyone else I saw, encouraged doctoral students, not just older faculty, to ask interesting questions. And he told me, you can do both. You can ask interesting questions and not just wrinkles on something else. That, and you can, follow it up with solid empirical research. And I think that really influenced me early on, because every time I thought of something, I kept thinking, if I do the perfect job, will it just be another wrinkle in the field, or will it be something that I could explain to my children and grandchildren and say, I searched for this, even if I didn't find it. And so this idea of asking important questions that are going to matter to the world in the long run. And he did it, of course, much better than me. And he looked at big, big issues. But I think that was one of his biggest influences on me. And he had many, obviously. And I'm very grateful for it.
Well, you're in a unique position again as a dean. You can see mid-career people, you can see junior faculty and doctoral students as well. What are some of these common mistakes that you see you should not be doing? It would waste so much of your time, efforts.
I don't know if I'm in a position to point out people's mistakes, but two things I would think are important. One, sometimes we sacrifice our passions too early on because we are told sometimes by senior professors and others to focus on what's doable, and because there is real pressure, right? You have to have all these top journals in 6 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, depending on your cycle, and publishing is becoming, so just to be kind of instrumental and to be expedient and get things out more than. And I actually think that's going to be hard to sustain in the long run, because hopefully we're going to be scholars for 50 years. And that if you're not into something you really love early on and you really believe in early on, I think it's hard to sustain a long and productive research career. And so I would encourage most young doctoral students to follow their passions. The second thing is, I think we sometimes collaborate in a convenient way. So it's locally convenient, or you collaborate with the advisor, then you collaborate with one or two senior people in your new, or maybe junior people in your new school. And I think the opportunities for collaboration, as we know, are much greater. And early on, doing a search for ideal collaborators, just because, they might have complementary capabilities or you have common interests. I know it's difficult, but the world has become much smaller now. We can achieve a lot on Zoom. We can, so to widen our collaborative potential so that we can do things that we couldn't otherwise do. I'm not saying these are common mistakes. I think these are both opportunities to think a little differently and sustain that passion, that drive, that expertise, that learning that started with a doctoral program, but has to continue, I think, not just for 5 or 6 years, for hopefully 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. We all want to be excited about our research. So I still am grateful, not still, maybe up to 5 years ago when I'd start talking about something so excitedly and my wife would fall asleep because I knew I still had this passion for what I was doing. And even if it didn't, matter so much because as you can imagine, my wife's been hearing all this stuff, knowledge flows and competition and, innovation for so many years. And I'd say, cool, I'm still excited. I've still got it.
Okay, for the sake of time, what's the question I should have asked you but haven't?
Oh, I don't know. I think you've asked lots of good questions. You asked me about myself and my career. Maybe what am I most proud of in my life? And to tell the truth, I'm glad I've been a researcher. I'm glad I've been a dean. I'm most proud of the impact I've had on my students, because students who I taught 25 years ago still come by and tell me things I told them, which I've forgotten myself and I didn't even realize. And I realized to some extent, the younger Paul, the more passionate Paul, lives on in people I taught. And I'm so, I don't know, proud or grateful for that, because sometimes I've lost some of that passion and lost some of those insights. Just very, very recently, a kid, not a kid, he's probably nearly 50, came by and said, at the end of class, they had to evaluate each other. And he said, I told them, be fair. And if you can't be fair, be kind. And he said, I've made that part of my philosophy in life, and I'll never forget that. And I was thinking, wow, I didn't even know I'd said it. But people who also, remember things I taught them in strategy or IB. And I think I, in strange ways, in spite of my many limitations, I live on as a teacher, and I'm grateful for that.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I learned a lot, as always, from you. It was a great pleasure again. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah. And thank you for remembering me after all these years, giving me the opportunity, seriously, to talk with you. I always remember you were so kind. You drove me to the airport. Was I visiting as a doctoral student? I can't remember now. It was very early on. Maybe as a young professor.
You were an assistant professor? Yeah. I was a first-year PhD student.
Yeah. Yep. And thank you for remembering me and keeping in touch. I appreciate it.
Thanks.